evening. Welcome to Jim Chapman Live on Rogers Television. Tonight we're going to take a look at a new manufacturing process that holds the promise of making our automobiles and our trucks both cheaper and safer. Maybe. We're going to find out. And we're going to talk to a man who's traveled the world in search of sacred places. He's going to share the results of some of his travels and talk about his many books, the books he's written about the places he's been, things he's seen and done. Brad Olsen is his name, and he'll be our guest too tonight on Jim Chapman Live, plus a very interesting media misfire and who knows what else. You stay with us and we'll all find out together right here on Rogers Television. There's Brad Olsen joins us here on Jim Chapman Live, only on Rogers Television. You know, I've said many times on this program and the radio show too, what a neat job I have. I mean, I get to talk to people on radio and television, get to write a little bit for newspaper magazines. It was a great job. I love my job. But if I couldn't do it, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, I would want to do what our next guest is doing, because he's got a job that's way neater than mine. Brad Olsen travels the world, investigating sacred sites around the world, indulging his interest in history and prehistory, and writing about it and sharing it with millions of people around the world. And Brad is our guest tonight on Jim Chapman Live. It's a real treat to have you here.
Great to be here, Jim. Thanks for having me.
And I want to acknowledge Mike Boyd's help in getting Brad to us tonight. We really appreciate that. Mike is a friend of the program, and it's great that he took the time to do this. I am absolutely fascinated. You and I talked on the way here about what you do for a living, and rather than me talk about it, I'm going to ask you to tell our viewers what you do. I mean, obviously you write books. That we've talked a little bit about that, but what's it all about?
Well, right now I'm doing a series of guidebooks called Sacred Places per Continent, 108 destinations. So that means I have to get out to a lot of these sites, photograph them, talk to the curators, and research the background. I also like to spend a little time at each site and just spend some quiet time and think about it and see what comes to me. And oftentimes it's sort of like nurturing the sixth sense. You get an interpretation in your own mind what it might be. But my books are a lot more objective than that. They just give the background and history of each site, and they encourage people to go to the sites themselves and see what they feel, and see what they think.
Somebody asked me this morning, because I was mentioning after the show, I was talking with the people on the station that you were going to be on tonight, and mentioned the sacred places, and he said, what, is this like a guidebook to churches of North America?
Not too many churches, more sanctuary, sacred mountains, prehistoric mound sites, and interesting relics that have popped up that may have been associated with prehistoric temples or places of worship. So it's primarily about the sites themselves.
There is a very rich historical and prehistorical record in North America. I know a lot of people sort of have this idea that it was a fairly rustic area until the Europeans came along and either improved it or wrecked it, depending on your point of view. But in fact, there is a long history that is documented, fragmentarily documented, but documented out there. And many of these places fit into that sort of ongoing development of that picture.
That's true, and we all know the story of Columbus. We all know about the Pilgrims coming here at 1620, front and back. And that's the isolationist point of view, that prehistoric visitors had little influence on our Native American people. Well, the cultural diffusionist point of view is that small groups of people did come in prehistory, and they left a mark. They left temples, they left beehive structures, they left rune stones all across the continent, not just the East Coast, but quite amazing places that you wouldn't expect to find such relics.
And we've seen the development of our understanding and acceptance of the historical establishment, and we're not going to knock them, but there is a historical establishment. When I was a kid back in the 1950s in school, they laughed at the suggestion that the Vikings had been here. I mean, it was, and literally laughed. You raised it in class. Christopher Columbus was the first European to set foot in the New World, and that was the end of it. Well, now, 45 years later, we know, not only, we don't accept it, we know, we've got physical proof that the Vikings were here.
Absolutely.
500 years before Columbus. So who else might have been here?
Well, even before the Vikings, we have the Celtics were famous mariners about 500, 1000 AD. And even before Christ, they were allied with the Phoenicians. who came out after the Punic Wars and settled in North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, which is now Spain. Prolific travelers, knew the seaways, knew the currents, knew the routes across the Atlantic. And let's face it, it's not hard to cross the Atlantic. People have done it in a bathtub. Young boys have done it on their own in a sailboat. So to think that skilled mariners who studied the stars as well as the currents and weather systems wouldn't be coming over here is absolutely ridiculous. And as I told you on the way over, oftentimes the debunking theory of some of these relics that we're finding and have found for the last 100 years is more ridiculous than, well, what if they came over? And if they came over, what were their motives? And to a large degree, their motive is the same motivations of modern people. It's a profit motive. And up in Lake Superior is the richest source of pure copper in the world. In prehistoric times, copper was more valuable than gold or silver because copper is the main ingredient for producing bronze. And in the Bronze Age, they made their swords, their shields, their armor. It was a very prized mineral, and not mineral, metal. People came through the Great Lakes region, up the Mississippi, to mine this copper and then take it back to Europe and sell it at high prices.
And we today, the conventional line of history, has trouble acknowledging that reality.
Unfortunately, that's true. I'm hoping with people reading my books that they will go to these sites, see that they're special, hopefully take part in the preservation of these sites and the reinterpretation of them in their historical relegated place. By the way, this year is the true 1,000-year anniversary of the discovery of North America. It's well documented in the Viking sagas. They came down here in the year 1001 and followed up many excursions and created a colony in New England called Vinland. And that's the subject of a screenplay that I'm writing.
I want to ask you a little bit about the preservation, because your books, they do draw our attention to the need to preserve these sites, and many of them have been damaged and desecrated because they've not been recognized for what they are. They've been taken to be relics of the early pioneer days, etc., and some of these stone structures have been torn apart for building blocks, etc., etc., etc. It is very important that we preserve them, even if we don't have a full understanding today of what their meaning is. We may very well have new insights tomorrow. But if they're gone, the insights will do us no good.
That's true. And for a large part, I'm very sad to say, many of these relics have been lost and continue to take less than an important role in the history and preservation of some of these sites. There are people out there that are working hard to get these sites recognized and get them on the preservation boards of the communities that they're in. But unfortunately, there just hasn't been a great interest in cultural diffusionism till the last 15 or 20 years. And now we're finding more and more that a lot of these sites have not only historical meaning for the sites themselves, but now tie into the new science of archaeoastronomy, which is discovering astronomical sightings through the arrangement of where certain parts of the sites are. Excellent case in point is last summer I cut across the Canadian plains checking out the medicine wheels. Very little known sites, hundreds of these medicine wheels, many with astrological alignments. We camped out at the Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming, saw the sunrise right up over the main alignment there, and was really happy to see all the summer star sightings as well. So it looks like the Plains Indians, not only were they the noble savages of lore, but had some insight into the movements of the stars and the sun patterns and knew the seasons.
Now that's been the archaeoastronomy that you talk about has been a very interesting relative new development, as you say, and the value of it is that it allows us to date some of these sites that we believe do have astronomical significance, because we know that the precession of the Earth and so on has changed the star array relative to particular times of the year, but we're now learning how, or have learned how to decipher that and sort of back the clock up. So we could back and say, well, if we assume this is a mathematical instrument, an astronomical instrument, and we assume that it is designed to show us the summer solstice, etc., and it points in this direction. Well, where was the summer solstice, etc.? And we can date these things to an extent we couldn't do 40 or 50 years ago.
That's correct. And now with computer modeling, we can even see that visually. So we can back up the clock and see where these alignments would have occurred at their most obvious spots, back the time up, and then date the sites on that new information.
Brad Olsen is our guest tonight. He is the author. His sixth book. This is the sixth one or the seventh one?
This will be my sixth.
This is the sixth one, which is coming out later this year. It's called Sacred Places, North America, 101 8 Destinations. We're going to talk about some of the other 5 books and some of his favorite destinations, and we're going to do that here tonight on Jim Chapman Live on Rogers Television. Our guest tonight on the second portion of Jim Chapman Live is Brad Olsen, who is an author and world traveler and adventurer and a contributor to World Explorer magazine, which is a very interesting publication. It is exactly what the title says. It's about exploring the world and looking for the interesting things therein. Brad does write for it, and I have one of his articles here in this particular magazine about your four top sacred places in the world, the ones that you sort of say are the top of the pile if you really want to experience the magic of pilgrimage sites. These are top pilgrimage sites. These are places to go. River Ganges, Mecca and Medina, Lourdes, and Mount, how do I say it? Kailash, which is in the Himalayas in Tibet. Why these particular 4? What is special about them? Why would you choose them out of all the ones you've written about over the years?
Well, these are so important because they're very important to the millions of people who go to them. And I think there's something about a site when many people go there and worship or revere the site itself that it almost gives it power. And when it does that, it takes on a new meaning all of its own. So a place like the River Ganges, where millions of pilgrims go to on an annual basis just to cleanse themselves in this water, it brings on a certain purity, if not only in their mind, because we know the Ganges is a very polluted river, but in their mind, it's the cleanest, clearest, purest water that they could bathe in. And one particular thing I found interesting when I was in India and visited the River Ganges, just upstream is where they have the burial ghats. So they're burning bodies, they're throwing the cremated bodies into the river, and then downstream are the bathing ghats where people are taking a plunge. Don't ask me why, but
it's spiritually pure water.
It's spiritually pure to them, and according to them, they don't get sick, and they only get enhanced by it.
Now, the mountain in Tibet is an interesting one. You were telling me a story about that if you circumnavigate this a set number of times, you get a sort of a get-out-of-jail-free card or something. How does that work?
Well, according to the Hindus and Buddhists who make pilgrimages to Mount Kailash, at the top of the Tibetan plateau, it starts rising at 18,000 feet and goes up to about 24,000 feet. So it's a very inhospitable climate. But to do a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash is among the best things you could do in your spiritual life as a Buddhist or a Hindu. If you were to get there several times and do 108 laps around the mountain, you're assured your place in nirvana. And that's why I use the 108 for the destinations in my guidebook, because it is a spiritually enhanced number.
You also talk about Mecca and Medina, which are two of the holiest of holies for people of the Muslim faith, which is about a fifth of humanity now, professes to follow the Muslim faith, and very, very important places for them.
Absolutely, and this is the top pilgrimage site on the planet. Literally millions of people go there every year to circle around the Kaaba, which at its core is a meteorite, which is in a big black box in the center of Mecca.
And according to legend, it was from that rock that I believe that Abraham ascended to heaven, I think was
well, actually, that's in Jerusalem, which is also another top site, on his horse Borak.
Okay.
And that's why there are quite so many tensions in Israel. I mean, we could talk all about Israel tonight.
There is a significance to the Kaaba, too. That was the point of connection between the heavens and someone. Mine's getting old and lame. Anyway, we'll think about that. We'll come back to that. Fascinating story about Sir Richard Burton, who was mentioned in the magazine here, who was one of the first people to actually go there, even though he was not a Muslim, but was very interested in the Muslim faith and so on, and managed to penetrate the layers of security and participate in the pilgrimage, and brought that story back to the rest of the world. For many people, was one of the first introductions in the last century into the whole Islamic faith.
That's right. Now with the advent of television, books, media, we can finally see what it's like and ourselves to go to these destinations. However, non-believers are not allowed to go to Mecca or Medina, but we can go to Lourdes, France, and I visited there a year and a half ago. This is the newest of my top 4 pilgrimage sites. It was just founded in 1858 when a young French girl started having visions of the Virgin Mary, and spontaneously a healing spring popped up in a grotto, which at the time was just a junkyard on the outside of this small town called Lourdes. It's now the top pilgrimage site in Europe, attracts I think 1.5 million people every year, and the water itself that comes out of the spring is very peculiar. It has a clustered structure to its components. If looked under the microscope, it's very unique. It's not like the regular kind of water we drink, but it's the molecules are clustered together, and they almost look like snowflakes. They take on a very peculiar design. Interestingly, there's only, I think, 10 known wells where this clustered water originates from, and in each case, that well is considered sacred by the local people or is a recognized pilgrimage site.
We're talking with Brad Olsen tonight, who is the author of 6 books about traveling the world and seeking out the sacred places thereon. I want to ask you about the ones in North America, some of the ones perhaps in the new book, maybe places that people watching tonight might want to visit this summer, but there's some that aren't too far afield. But before I do that, I want to mention that I'll go and talk to my friend, Professor Munir Al-Qasim, and find out what the deal was with the Kaaba, because I don't want to get that wrong for all my Muslim friends out there. We're in London, Ontario here. You mentioned the Medicine Wheels in Western Canada. We could go there. Are there other places within a couple days' drive that you would suggest people might want to seek out?
Absolutely, and I think the success of this book is going to be because there are so many that are accessible. Tomorrow, Mike and I are going to go to the Peterborough petroglyph site, which is an amazing array of petroglyphs, not only dating from Native Americans, but there are some petroglyphs there that are very characteristic of Nordic, ancient Scandinavian design, as well as Hopi Indian. There are 2 small glyphs that look like the Kachina flute player called Kokopelli, which is prolific in the southwest region of Arizona and New Mexico. And the new theory is that the Hopi took this knowledge. They were purveyors of knowledge, of goodwill, and they went out on pilgrimages on a yearly basis, and if you trace how corn made its way up to this part of North America, it's a striking similarity to some of the Hopi migrations and perhaps the story that they were purveyors of knowledge for the rest of the American Indians on this continent.
And the petroglyphs might well be sort of a Kilroy was here opportunity for all of these various travelers who came through.
Absolutely, and in many cases petroglyph sites are like that. They're like giant billboards where people will say Kilroy was here or mark their famous glyph, whatever it may be. I was just at Digham Rock in Boston about a week ago, and that's another famous marking stone of many different cultures. And that's just down the river from Fall Rivers, Massachusetts, where they found the famous skeleton in armor, which was wearing bronze suit of armor with bronze arrow tips and these strange tubes belting, which a lot of cultural diffusionists believe to be Thorvald Eriksson, who is Leif Eriksson's younger brother, came 3 years after Leif to do a thorough exploration of the new land that they had named Vinland. And Vinland refers to the grapes they found. Grapes only grow on the east coast from Connecticut to southern Maine, so by using Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is often the true. That's where Vinland was, where the grapes grow wild.
Now the remains of this warrior, can people see them?
Unfortunately, they were lost in a fire 10 years later, but not before the famous poet Longfellow saw the remains and wrote the poem about the skeleton in armor and the famous Newport Tower, which is also right there in the area, which may be the oldest Christian building in North America.
How old do we think it is?
We think it's about 900 years old, built about 1100 AD by the Norsemen who had become Christianized. There are Vatican records of the Vatican sending over bishops to make the last pagans of Europe were Iceland, and then Greenland, and then Vinland. And they have records of the bishops coming all the way over. They called it the stepping stones to America. It wasn't called America at that time, of course, but the stepping stones would be those islands from Greenland to Newfoundland to Nova Scotia to Vinland.
Now you're going to be, I don't want to run out of time here, I want to get this in. You're going to be doing a book signing this weekend at Medieval Links in Sparta, which is a gift shop in historic Sparta, which is one of my favorite spots around here, located on the main street right next to the Tea Room and Peter Robson's studio there. And you'll be Saturday when?
Saturday from 11 to 1, and I'll have copies of several of my books. Unfortunately, Sacred Places North America, 108 Destinations, will not be out until the fall, and it's rather odd for an author to be promoting a book pre-press, but I'll be there talking about sacred places and travel and signing my other books.
Well, I want to invite you back right now when this book comes out. Please do come back and join us. We'd like to talk some more about it. And I'm guessing on Saturday, if folks wanted not only to buy a book and get it signed and maybe have a little chat, that you'd be happy to do that as well.
Absolutely.
As you look back on all the places you've visited, and you talked before, we only got about a minute here, you talked before about trying to open your sixth sense to these places. Is there any one that sticks out in your mind? Is there any one where you made a more profound connection, perhaps, than any of the others?
Yes. On the top of the Great Pyramid in Egypt, I had a very profound experience. I felt like I went over the threshold from being an atheist to someone who found that there were spiritual meanings in my life. And I felt like I had a conversation with my recently deceased grandfather, who I was very close to, and had deeper perceptions into the meaning of the Great Pyramids and the age of the Sphinx and things like that. And let me tell you, they're a lot older than people think.
Yeah. Brad, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a great pleasure. We'll look forward to seeing you when you come back with the new book.
And I will.
All right. This is... What is this? Jim Chapman Live. I almost said Talk of the Town. That's in the morning. This is Jim Chapman Live on Rogers Television. We will pause for a moment. We're going to come back with our media misfire, give you a couple of updates on things that are going on here around us, and wrap the whole show up here on Rogers Television.